Are we good? All right. Let's start with a word of prayer. Father, we do thank you for the testimony that Sherry shared this morning, and thank you for the great work that they were able to accomplish in the Czech Republic, and thank you for taking her there safely and bringing her home safely. Just thank you for opportunities to share the gospel and just be a light in the lives of the people in that part of the world. Just thank you for her service and her dedication. And Father, be with us today as we study this passage in Deuteronomy. Just guide our conversation and our teaching, and we just thank you for this time. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Okie doke. So as I put in the email, if you read the email, we are back tracking a little bit from where we were a couple weeks ago. When we last met week before Easter on Passover Sunday, we were in chapter 16. We skipped ahead to allow us to teach on the Passover feast, or the feast in general, on Passover Sunday, which we thought would be kind of cool. But that meant we had to skip chapter 15. So we're going to go back to chapter 15, pick that up, and then the next lesson will be 19, I think.
Your weekly report is available.
Yeah. Well, they average 2 hours and 52 minutes, just so you know.
That's pretty good. Per day or week?
I don't know.
That changes my answer.
Okay. All right. So in this lesson, we're going to we'll look at the Old Testament passages, and then we'll look at, we find the instruction in the Old Testament in Deuteronomy, but then we look at the application in the New Testament to see how that is applied going forward, or how we can apply that today. In this lesson, we're going to look also at Exodus and Leviticus. As you know, Deuteronomy is a restatement of the law that Moses gave in Exodus. So we're going to look at the original passages in Exodus and Leviticus and Deuteronomy and see the comparisons and see where they are different from each other. And then we'll go into the New Testament. We'll look at James, 1 John, Matthew. We actually won't read Mark. Matthew and Mark, those are parallel passages, parallel stories. So we'll probably focus just on Matthew. But if you want to, look those up and flag those locations in your Bible, we'll have them on the screen too. So unfortunately, Wendy's not here to read for us today. So I'm going to read in Exodus 23, 10 through 13. What I want you to do is listen for what is the overall commandment? What's the rule that he's laying down here? Okay? So verse 10, it says, "Now you shall sow your land for 6 years, and gather in its produce. But in the 7th year you shall let it rest and lie fallow, so that the needy of your people may eat, and whatever they leave, the beast of the field may eat. Thus you shall do with your vineyard and your olive grove." And then he compares this to just the Sabbath. 6 days you are to do your work, but on the 7th day you shall rest, so that your ox and your donkey may rest, and the son of your maidservant as well as your sojourner may refresh themselves. Now concerning everything which I have said to you, beware, do not mention the name of other gods, nor let them be heard from your mouth. So I think 13 is just kind of a tack on there. We're really focusing on 10, 11, and 12. So what do you see as the main command, or the main rule here that he's telling them?
Let the land rest for a year.
Let the land rest for a year in the 7th year. Right. Okay?
Does that mean that the poor only ate once every 7 years?
No. We'll talk a little bit more
You'll
about
explain
these.
that, Chris.
We're going to go through and just look at the verses first, and we'll talk a little bit about them. Okay, Leviticus 25, 1 through 7. So again, similar passage, but I want you to see some of the differences. Each one of these has some slight nuances. So Yahweh then spoke to Moses at Mount Sinai, saying, "Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land which I am giving to you, then the land shall have a Sabbath to Yahweh." Here he's calling it the land shall have a Sabbath. 6 years you shall sow your field, in 6 years you shall prune your vineyards and gather in its produce. But during the 7th year, the land shall have a Sabbath rest. a Sabbath to Yahweh. You shall not sow your field nor prune your vineyard. What grows of its own accord, now this is a little bit different from the previous. What grows from its own accord from your harvest you shall not reap, and your grapes of untrimmed vines you shall not gather. The land shall have a sabbatical year, and the Sabbath produce of the land shall be for food for you and your male and female slaves, and your hired men and your foreign resident, those who sojourn with you. Even your cattle and the beasts that are in your land shall have all the produce to eat. So in the previous passage, we see that the people eat first, and then whatever's left over, the beasts, the animals can have. And that's kind of repeated over here. So the cattle and the beasts can eat the produce, but it's only what is voluntary crops at this point. That's what they can eat during this sabbatical year. Okay, so then we're going to move on to Deuteronomy. This is a little bit longer passage. So again, here Moses is recapping the law that was previously stated. He says in verse 1, at the end of every 7 years, you shall grant a remission of debts. So what do you see that's different so far?
We're not talking about land anymore.
Yeah, we're not talking about just the land. Now we're talking about debts. So it's still the sabbatical year, but in the previous two passages, he was focused mainly on the land has a sabbatical year. We let the land rest, but now we're also introducing the idea of a remission of debts. And then verses 2 through 11 kind of explain how this was going to work. It says, and this is the manner of remission. Every creditor shall release what has been loaned to his neighbor, and he shall not exact it of his neighbor and of his brother, because of the remission from Yahweh has been proclaimed. From a foreigner you may exact it, but your hand shall release whatever of yours is with your brother. We'll talk about the difference between brother and foreigner here in just a little bit, because I know George is ready to ask that question. However, there will be no needy among you, since Yahweh will surely bless you in the land which Yahweh your God is giving you as an inheritance to possess. If only you listen obediently to the voice of Yahweh your God, to be careful to do all his commandment, this commandment which I am commanding you today. For Yahweh your God will bless you as he has promised, and you will lend to many nations, but you will not borrow, and you will rule over many nations, but they will not rule over you. There's a lot to read, but we'll come back and discuss this here in just a little bit. If there is a needy one among you, one of your brothers, in any of the gates of the towns in your land which Yahweh your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart or close your hand from your needy brother. So now here we're going back to some of the physical needs of our brothers. But you shall freely open your hand and give to him, and open your hand to him, and shall generously lend to him sufficient for his need and whatever he lacks. Beware lest there be a vile thought in your heart, saying, the 7th year, the year of the remission of debts is near, and your eye is hostile toward your needy brother, and you give him nothing. Then he may cry to Yahweh against you, and it will be a sin. And it will be a sin in you. You shall generously give to him, and your heart shall be grieved when you give to him, and your heart shall not be grieved when you give to him, because for this thing Yahweh your God will bless you in all your work and in all you send forth your hand to do. For the needy shall cease to be in your land. Therefore I am commanding you, saying, you shall freely open your hand to your brother, to your afflicted and needy in your land. All right, so I'm going to skip forward here. So just kind of summarizing what we have read in these passages. So some of the instructions that we see, we are to sow and gather for 6 years. So that is mentioned in the Exodus and the Leviticus passage. We are to let the land lie fallow in the 7th year. That's also mentioned in the Exodus and the Leviticus passage. If there is spontaneous growth, what one of the writers calls the Sabbath produce, that can be gathered and eaten by those in need. We see that in Exodus and Leviticus. And then in Deuteronomy, we add another rule or another aspect of this. Debts are to be forgiven in the 7th year. Then that commandment is explained or expanded in verses 2 through 11.
So are the 7th year the same
Between, say that again?
for giving away debts and also for the, leaving the land fallow? Is that the?
I think, yeah, I
all
think
the-
so.
all the same
You know, that's a
year?
good question. I don't know that, I assume they were. I see no indication that it's a different sequence of years. Yes.
Is there any mention of the forgiveness of debts in Exodus or Leviticus or the land in Deuteronomy?
No,
Interesting.
no, but what's the common theme here?
It says Sabbath and rest.
It's a Sabbath and rest, right, and also it's a releasing, it's a setting free of something. So there is a common thread here, yeah. So to your point, or to kind of expand on that question, what does lie fallow mean? Are any of you grew up in a farming community or know about farming? Okay, what does it mean to lie fallow?
Yeah, we would actually till half the land every year.
Okay,
My brother, who took over from my dad, increased that, but if you didn't do that periodically, the land would stop producing. Mostly because I think you're using up most of the nutrients.
yeah. So that's kind of what I assumed, but as I was reading this and studying, I thought, I don't really know exactly what it means to lie fallow. What is the benefit of doing this? So I actually, I looked that up, and let's see.
We spent all summer while you're looking at that up,
Yeah.
tilling that land. It was a horrible. You get out of school and you get on the tractor and you go through the fields once and over 2 weeks and you start over the next 2 weeks.
George, you might need to explain tilling.
Cultivating, plowing,
Okay, use a not farmer word.
Yeah,
Turning it over?
yeah, so you took
Turn it over the soil.
exactly. With
So
a
you weren't
tractor.
planting anything?
No, it was completely unplanted. So the weeds and the volunteer wheat, so the wheat that wasn't thrashed would fall on the ground, and the next spring it would come up. And if you didn't till that, then it would use up all the moisture. So the next year you'd have a deficit in moisture. That was part of it.
So tilling it basically was taking the seed that was left there and planting it.
No, it's just the opposite.
You were turning it under, so.
Yeah, well, you would just keep killing it, and after the first or second time, the wheat's not coming back, but the weeds are coming back. So you're killing the weeds probably 3 or 4 times a year. Now they use chemicals to do it.
Yeah.
They spray it.
Yeah. I think that's the problem that nowadays, they're just using too many chemicals and we don't have, the food is not as nutritious as it used to be.
Yeah.
Hybrid seed.
We can discuss this at lunch.
Okay.
I'll tell you how everything we did in Saskatchewan is bad for us.
We can discuss this while you're eating those big juicy tomatoes.
Yeah.
It's finish the conversation, be like, okay, who wants some ice cream?
Yeah. All right. So thank you, George. That was very consistent with what I have here. Lie fallow means to leave unsown or to restore fertility, basically. The goal of fallowing is to allow the land to recover and store organic matter while retaining moisture and disrupting pest life cycles and soil-borne pathogens by temporarily removing their hosts. So that's the definition of lying fallow. I also read an article by a gardening group, and they were looking at Texas A&M research, and they said the benefits of fallowing is it allows the soil to replenish nutrients that can be leached from the plants or irrigation, allows potassium and phosphorus to rise up to the surface of the soil. It allows levels of carbon, nitrogen, and other organic matters to increase in the soil. It improves the moisture holding capacity, which you mentioned. It increases beneficial microorganisms, and even things like earthworms and other things that help till the land for us a little bit. They thrive when the crops aren't there. So they are more active and do a better job of replenishing the soil when the crops aren't being planted and harvested and things like that. So there are a lot of benefits of fallowing that I hadn't really thought about. So those are physical benefits of fallowing. Are there spiritual benefits of this process, of this suspending activity for a year? So can somebody get Leviticus 25:23? Short verse.
I can do it.
Yeah, please.
The land shall not be sold in perpetuity, for the land is mine, for you are strangers and sojourners with me.
Okay, so who does the land belong to?
God.
God. Who brings the increase?
God.
Does man really do anything to provide for himself, or is this all God?
It's all good.
That's the reminder. So there's a spiritual aspect of this too, it's a reminder of the people of Israel that God is your provision. You can let the ground lie fallow for a year, and I will provide for you. So going back to George's question, is this the only year that the poor people eat? Well, no, they eat throughout the other 6 years, but where does their provision come from? They are hired hands are working for people, and they're getting their wages and their feed from other people. But during the 6th year, when they are not laboring in the fields, they're not working, God sustains them by providing that spontaneous growth, and says that belongs to the poor people. They can go in and eat and sustain themselves during that 7th year. Presumably, I'm assuming from all of this that those who own the land have retained some kind of a storehouse. They have the ability to store, and they've got food for that 7th year. But God provides for the wage or the laborers by saying you can go in and take the growth, that spontaneous growth that comes out of the field. And then after you're done, the animals can have their fill.
So grains, if they're kept dry, will last 2-3 years easily. Yeah. So presumably the harvest is a very labor-intensive process, and so the poor would have to be harvesting that whatever is growing on that field. So they have to put some effort into it, right?
Yeah.
I think, I could be misremembering, but I thought somewhere in the first 5 books it said that on the 6th year that you get a double portion, and then that is what you use to feed you. But that might be in a different part of scripture.
Yeah, that's in Leviticus. It says on the 6th year you'll get enough for the 7th year and the 8th year, because the 8th year you have to plant, so you can't harvest.
Oh wow.
So you give them 2 extra years.
2 extra years. That's awesome.
Mhm.
And then also, so the poor is the sojourner, right? Or maybe the widow or as well. But in chapter 15 it said there will be no poor among you, right? Obviously, if you follow my commands. But I thought that was interesting too. That's specifically kind of the people who are not Israelites.
I thought that was my next point, but yeah, hold that thought, and we'll come back to it in just a minute. So this is also related to the year of Jubilee. If you go back into Leviticus, continue reading in chapter 25, what happens, there will be 7 of these Sabbath years, and then after 7 Sabbath years, which adds up to 49, the 50th year, what happens in the 50th year?
All debts are
Jubilee.
Oh, well, more specifically, all the land goes back to the original owners in that year of Jubilee. So every 50th year, each person will return to his own possession. So yeah, all debts are forgiven. All of your land is restored back to you in that 50th year. So just wanted to mention that. That's not specifically covered in this passage, but kind of tangentially, it is related. Okay, so so the law of cancellation, this idea of forgiving debts, what does this mean? Every creditor shall release what is loaned to his neighbor, but they may collect debts from a foreigner. So what does it mean to release the loan? There's a couple of different thoughts on here, and I'll see what you think, and I'll tell you what I think. Doesn't really matter, but does this mean that the debts are completely eliminated, like zeroed out, they no longer exist, and there's no debt going forward? Or does it mean that we are merely suspending the debt payments for the 7th year, and then in the 8th year, then you resume payments and the principal still remains, but you just don't have to pay the debt for that 7th year?
Eliminate.
Okay, and why do you think that, Bob?
The word cancellation says a lot to me.
That means you wipe it clean.
Just on verse 3 for that passage, I see, of a foreigner you may exact it, but whatever of yours is with your brother, your hand shall release.
Mm-hmm.
So that to me that's why I'm going option 1 too.
Yep.
Alex.
Yeah.
You?
Option 1 as well.
Final answer?
Your final answer.
Do you want to phone a friend?
Not this guy.
You have David Klingler's number?
Yeah. All right, so there's arguments for each of these. The argument in favor of option 1, suspend or eliminated, well, actually, let's start with option 2. The option for just suspending it is that during the 7th year, when the land was to lie fallow, an Israelite debtor would not have the means to pay the debt, but in the next 6 years he would. So the debts of a foreign business person were not canceled because he did not let his land lie fallow. So the argument here is that this principle was not just the elimination of debt, so to speak, it was tied to the fact that the Hebrews or the Jews let their land lie fallow, and so to accommodate that, they're going to suspend their payments for the year, whereas the foreigners continue making their payments. So that's the argument there. Yes?
Something that sticks out to me is that if you give the land back to its original owner, it's not gonna be just for a year. You're giving the land back to them, correct? I mean,
Well, every 50 years, you give the land back to the original owner, yeah.
right, so, and it's the same terminology.
Oh, I see what you're saying, so it's a, right, yep, being consistent with the principle throughout, right, I see what you're saying. And I agree with that.
According to Ryrie.
Pardon?
The guy's right.
Wendy's not here. Wendy's not here to quote Ryrie for us today.
An
All right.
unconditional remission.
Okay, unconditional, all right.
Remission.
All right, so I agree with that view, and these are the views or the principles of in favor of that view. First, it is more consonant with the generosity of the Lord what the Lord has expressed to Israel. When if you think about this 7th year as a release, we're releasing we're releasing the land from its labor, so to speak. We are releasing people from their debts. And then a little bit later in this same chapter, we'll see that slaves are also to be released and set free in the 7th year. They work 6 years and they're to be released in the 7th year. So there's this whole idea that runs this thread of releasing and setting free. And if you think about God's character, what did he do for Israel, bringing them out of Exodus? He totally set them free and was very generous in his provision. So this concept is a lot more consistent with God's dealing with us and our redemption and so forth.
So this release it's for all of Israel? Covers every nook and cranny of Israel? Is that?
It's for, well, I would say it's for all Jews. So I'm not sure if you're talking about a political area or a group of people, but I think it's for all Jews.
Somewhere somebody's got to be keeping track of all this, right? That over this many years, people were born, people died, legacies, exist and all this, so there's gotta be somebody who says, I'm responsible for keeping track of all this.
Well, don't forget, prior to this, they set up essentially a Supreme Court where they've got governors and state heads, and then, if this trial is too hard for you, bring it back up to me, a situation like that,
Yeah.
so.
Thanks to Jethro.
Mhm.
So,
I think they are keeping very detailed records.
Yeah.
We know nothing else about them. They keep a lot of records.
well, and the other thing is, if you are a landowner, if you are a person that has means, one of the things that he points out in here, and this is another reason why I support the total elimination view, is he says specifically that if somebody comes to you in the 6th year and you say, whoa, wait, it's the 6th year, I'm not gonna loan to you because I'm gonna lose it all next year, that's even worse. You should give even more generously in the 6th year. So, so the people are very cognizant, they're very aware of the timing and what it means when they're loaning money. I've got 3 more years left on this loan, or I've got 1 more year left on this loan. So the clock is very well maintained, I think.
So it has to be for the whole nation, it's the
Yes.
same year.
Right.
So everyone knows what year it is.
Right.
So what was the motivation to pay back your debt then?
Pound of flesh.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So, okay, so I guess,
It's a real
Honor-
Gen Z
honoring-
way to look at it.
well, I think,
Millennial.
okay, so from the debtor's perspective, your motivation is, your honor, your integrity and things like that. But, I also think that if you came to me in the 6th year and wanted to borrow, if you look at in chapter 15, go down to verses 8 and 9. It says, let's see,
Chapter 18 of Deuteronomy?
15.
15.
Yeah. Let's see, I think, is that the right verse?
You shall freely open your hand to him, that one.
Yeah, I'm trying to think where it talks about if it comes to you in the 6th year. But you should.
Verse 9 says it.
Okay, verse
Don't
9.
have this wicked thought in your heart, the 7th year, the year of canceling debts is near, and you are stingy towards your poor brother and give him nothing.
Right, but I want to back up to 8. It says, but you shall freely open your hand to him and shall generously lend him sufficient for his need and whatever he lacks. Beware lest there be a vile thought in your heart saying, the 7th year, the year of the remission of debts, it's near. And your eye is hostile toward your needy brother, and you give him nothing. He may cry out to Yahweh against you, and it will be a sin against you. So notice the word here in verse 9 switches from loaning to giving. The expectation in the 6 years, you're giving it to him. You're assisting your brother, in need.
Therefore, there should not be any poor people in Israel.
There should not be any poor people in Israel. That's in verse 4, 5.
Or
There should
If
be
you-
no
if-
needy among you. There should be no needy among you.
And then in verse 5, there's that if only you will strictly obey the voice of the Lord your God, being careful to do all his commandments that I command you today.
Okay, so you're getting ahead of me,
Oh, sorry.
but actually, let's just do that. All right, so every creditor should release what is loaned to his neighbor, but, so in verse 4, it says, there will be no needy among you. And then in verse 11, it says, the needy will never cease to be among you. So which is it?
checkmate Christians.
What?
Checkmate Christians.
Is there
Yeah.
not a speaker shift between these verses? In the beginning, it's kind of speaking to them, like, do all these things that I'm telling you, and you won't have poor people, and then it shifts to Moses being like, but we all know that ain't happening.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
when there are needy, here's what you gotta do.
Yep, and I agree with that view. I think the first occurrence here, Moses, it's God speaking. If there will be no needy among you if you do these things. But then later, Moses is saying, but we know you're not gonna do those things. So the needy will always be among you. So at the end of Deuteronomy, we go through all of Deuteronomy, and Moses reminds him of the law. This whole book is him in his last last speech, just before they enter the promised land. He's reminding them, do this, do this, do this, so that it may go well with you in the land. But I know you're not gonna do it, and that's how the book basically ends.
And this keeps going, right? Like there was a cycle of, here's all the nations you should wipe out, and then just a few sentences later, it's like, when you marry a woman from one of these nations, and it's like, wait a second. If I followed you in the first step, I wouldn't need that second.
Exactly,
So, yeah, that seems like a pattern.
Yeah. So let's see, let me look at my notes. I think we covered that. So, yeah, how do we get from there will be no needy to the needy will always be with you? Jesus, we'll talk about this. We'll see this in the Matthew chapter verse here in just a little bit. Jesus will talk about this. But this is because Israel was supposed to take care of the needy among them. Since God blessed them in the land of verse 4, God will bless them as he promised in verse 6. They will lend to nations and not borrow. They will rule over the nations and they will not be ruled over. And then it says, big if, they listen obediently to God's voice and carefully follow the commandments. I can't remember who this is, but I had a quote in here I thought was really good. It says, the sad confession there will always be poor in the land is perhaps a tragic foreshadowing of Israel's refusal to obey the Lord fully. So that's how we get from, there will be no needy to where there will always be needy. Going to go back a slide here, talk about neighbor, brother, foreigner. What do these terms mean? So in the first couple of verses here, talks about verse 2 says, every creditor shall release what he has loaned to his neighbor. He shall not exact it of his neighbor and his brother, because of the remission of the Yahweh has been proclaimed. So who are brother and neighbor? What does that mean? And then who is the foreigner? The foreigner we can collect from, but not brother or neighbor. It's really pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
These aren't real complicated.
Relative is a brother.
Pardon?
A relative, your brother.
Okay,
And
so
the guy that lives next to you might be your neighbor.
yeah, very simple. So and I cannot pronounce these, but the word for brother literally means a male sibling or a brother. But colloquially, it can also be used as a nuance to represent any blood relative. So your entire family, you can call them my brethren or my brothers.
Mm-hmm.
So
Your cousins.
your cousins and so forth. So you guys would all be brothers, in that sense. So you gotta cancel your debts over here.
Are we all brothers in here?
Brothers in
Well,
Christ.
not by this definition,
No.
because we're not blood. But now here's an interesting thought. When he's talking to the Jews, would they be considered brothers because they are all blood relatives of Israel?
Well, he says in verse 12 in a slightly different context, if your brother, a Hebrew man or woman, is sold to you. So there he's clarifying that brother, at least in that,
Yeah.
means any Hebrew.
Yeah. See, and that's, I missed that detail, but yeah, that's what I thought is that, in that context, when he's talking about Jews, I think he's talking about all of them are brothers because they are related. But neighbor is another, the other term used here. It is, it means a personal friend with whom one shares confidences and to whom one feels very close. So just a very, very close associate. The closeness of relationship is best, let's see. Okay, he's like a brother or son, part of the family. So a neighbor is someone you're very close to, They live among you. They may not be a blood relative, but they are very close to you, and they are your neighbor. So, and then foreigner, the term here is nokri, that's the only one I can even come close to pronouncing, is used in the Hebrew Bible to describe something or someone that is foreign or alien. It often refers to people who are not Israelites, highlighting their status as outsiders or those who do not belong in the covenant community of Israel. So that last piece is the key. They are not part of the covenant community. They have not, there's another term for an alien who comes and commits themselves to living in the Jewish community and following the Jewish rules and things like that. They might be considered a neighbor in this context, but somebody who is just merely passing through, sojourning through the land, they would be considered a foreigner, and they do not receive the benefit of this year's Sabbath. Make sense? All right, so about neighbor, brother, foreigner. Gosh, I thought we'd end early today, but we've had a lot of discussion here. Okay, so now let's move to the New Testament and see how this is applied to the New Testament. So we move to James. If I can get somebody else to read that for me.
I could do it.
Thanks.
What use is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but he has no works? Can that faith save him? If a brother or sister is without clothing and in need of daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, be warmed and be filled, what yet you do not give them what is necessary for their bodies, what use is that? Even so, faith, if it has no works, is dead by itself.
Okay. So we back up to the very last verse in chapter 1. He says, pure and undefiled religion before God and Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep themselves unstained by the world. So then a little bit farther down in chapter 2, he's talking about this idea of faith and works. So what is he addressing here? What do you think James is trying to address? What's the issue that you think?
Passivity?
Okay. There is.
Actually, you gotta do what God has told you to do, the works, by giving. You just say, well, go in peace.
Yeah.
And leave the guy broke.
Yeah, part of what they're saying is that I'm saved by faith. I don't have to do anything else, But what he's saying is your faith without works is dead, and we'll see this, kind of explained in our next verse in 1 John, that if you love God, you will serve, you will do these things. But for somebody to say that they don't need to serve the widows, the orphans, and the poor because it's not a requirement, that's just not true. It's not a requirement for salvation. Don't mix that up. But your faith is worthless if you're not actively involved in feeding the poor and helping the orphans and so forth. How can the Jewish believers say that they keep the law if they don't care about the orphan, the widow, the alien, and so forth? Because these are commanded in the law to take care of these people. Just as the law gives no excuse for respected persons, so the possession of faith gives no license to dispense with good works. So I thought that was an interesting quote. Our faith isn't a license to do away with works. The believer must not only demonstrate his love by ready acceptance of others, but he must also demonstrate his faith by being responsible to aid others. So here, it's interesting, the word is very similar. Brother is adelphos, which is a brother or a blood brother, or a community-based identity. So somebody who is like a blood relative here. And the sister is the feminine version of the same thing. So he's addressing the same thing here. It says, a brother or sister without clothing in need is talking about the same thing that we were talking about in Deuteronomy, the brother in need. So let's move on to 1 John 3:16 through 18. Somebody else read that for us.
By this we have known love, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers. But whoever has the world's goods and sees his brother in need and closes his heart against him, how does the love of God abide in him? Little children, let us not love with word or with tongue, but in deed and truth.
So in verse 17, it says, he sees his brother and closes his heart against him. So do we close our hearts against others? It says, one of the reasons we find it difficult to care for our brothers and sisters in need is that we don't recognize, or we forget that the Lord has, how abundantly and lavishly God has cared for us. He provided for us and even laid down his life for us, so that we should be, to the point that we should be willing to lay down our lives for our friends, our neighbors. It says, we know this, we have, by this we've known love, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers. So we often forget how lavishly God has loved us and provided for us. We are not probably going to be called to lay down our lives for our brothers. Some of you have been in the military service or something like that. Maybe you have been in that situation, or maybe you've been in situations where you have. But that's not typically something that we are going to be faced with on a daily basis. But how do we express this in our world today?
Well, we've had people in this class that have needs, right? And so we certainly can open our hearts and help provide from abundance God has given us. Along these lines, from Deuteronomy, the charity is local. Other than in chapter 14, he talks about the Levites, you give a tithe to the Levites, but it's local in your community. If we're not taking care of our neighbors or our family members, there's something wrong, right?
But I would argue, even the tithe to the Levites, you could argue that's kind of localized.
Yeah,
as well.
exactly, because they were in each town.
Right.
So you were to take it to the Levite in that town. So it's a local system, and we rely on our government to tax us and to do the dirty work for us. Right?
Okay. I was going to not try to make this.
Sorry, you can rely on me to make it.
That's right, you should have asked someone else.
I spoke up voluntarily.
But I 100% agree that, if we were doing what God has called us to do, if we were taking care of our brother and our neighbor, if every local community, every local church was doing that thing, who is our brother? It's our relatives. And who is our neighbor? It's those who live among us. Who else is there? If every community was taking care of those needs, there would be no need for government interference.
In reality, churches used to do that
Exactly.
before the government
Yeah.
took it over.
I think having a lot of friends who lean liberally out of compassion, they don't want church discipline because that sounds harsh. But if you're going to give, you also have to pair it with church discipline so that people who are kind of being lazy and would just mooch off of you can't abuse the giving of the
Mhm.
church.
Well, I think that's the benefit of it being localized. If a person comes and says, hey, I've lost my job and I need assistance, you know, a living community would say, you know, you've been without a job now for 3 years. You know, it's time for you to, you know, find a job. We can assess and say, hey, you're able to work, and, you know, we are going to, we'll make sure you've got food or whatever, but we're going to help you find that job. And we'd help that brother or sister get back on their feet, not just give them, you know, money. We would assess the need and give accordingly.
To go with each of those statements too, I think it's important to remember the gleaners, right? There's hard work involved. It's not just you give them whatever they want, it's you leave a tenth of the field and they gotta go work for it.
That's true, very good point. Yep. Okay. We're just about out of time. Let's move to our last verse here, Matthew 26, 6 to 13. Now when Jesus was in Bethany at the home of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster jar of very costly perfume, and she poured it on his head as he reclined at the table. But when the disciples saw this, they were indignant, saying, "Why this waste? This perfume may have been sold for a high price and the money given to the poor." But Jesus, aware of this, said to them, "Why do you bother the woman? For she has done a good work to me. For you always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me. For when she poured this perfume on my body, she did it to prepare me for burial. Truly I say to you, wherever this gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be spoken of in memory of her." So the disciples were indignant. What was their concern?
Waste of money, give it to the poor.
Okay, so those are two different statements, Bob.
Waste of money.
Okay, okay. Were they concerned? Were they truly concerned about the poor?
No.
That was their pretense. They're saying, we could have given the money to the poor, but we see that today too. And that, you know, we could have done this, but the real issue they had, it was a selfish issue. They were, you know, they wanted the money in their storehouse, basically, is what they were saying. She was wasting our treasury funds by not providing for our funds.
Elsewhere, it's recorded that Judas was pilfering he was in charge of the benevolent
Yeah,
fund that he was
so
stealing.
what happens immediately, the next verse after this is Judas walking out and betraying Jesus. Very next thing. So there's been some speculation as may have been what prompted him to leave and
Or he
betray
might have
Jesus.
made the statement, verse 9.
Yeah, I think.
His disciples, though.
Well, okay, but I
They
think
were indignant.
if you go to John, I think in John's, John records the same story, and I think it is Judas who does make the first statement. It's
Is
recorded
it the
by John.
same event in John? She was doing his feet and using her hair.
Yeah,
And this says it puts it on his head.
yeah, I don't know, that's a good point. So, but you're right, we don't know, it doesn't really matter.
Well, here it says
They,
even if Judas instigated it here, they're agreeing with him. 'Cause
exactly. Yep.
Here it's in Bethany at the home of Simon the leper, and the other was in Bethany. I think Mary and Martha were throwing a dinner for Jesus.
Okay. So, like I say, you're right, all the disciples were in agreement. It doesn't really matter which one it was. It's not mentioned specifically in Matthew. Matthew doesn't feel the need to provide that particular detail. So,
It's John 12, if anyone's looking for it.
So I'm just going to read a couple of notes here because we're just about out of time. It says, Mary's beneficial act prepared his body for burial. Jesus had spoken several times of his coming death, but the disciples did not seem to believe his words. Mary believed and performed this act as a testimony of her devotion to him. As a result of her sacrificial act, it is often proclaimed throughout the world. Perhaps it was this act and the Lord's approval of it that made Judas willing to betray the Lord. From this scene, Judas went to the chief priest and offered to betray Jesus. So Mary was honoring Jesus. She was giving everything that she had. So another thing is to think about here is, what is the source of their income? The disciples were aghast that she would waste the money, but where does their income come from ultimately?
It was women supporting them.
Well, it's God is the provider.
Yeah.
And
But it was even, they weren't going out working, they're following Jesus around.
right.
And there are benefactors that are actually just giving money to them,
Yeah.
so, yeah.
So that's what I think the point is, they completely missed the point. They were so concerned about where's the money coming from, and Jesus saying, you don't have to worry about the money. Go back and think about how He's provided for them in the Sabbath year. That's God provides. All right, we're out of time. We should wrap up. I think the kids are probably out in the hallway waiting. But there's one last section here. I'm not gonna spend much time here. Again, we talked about another thing at the end here is the release of slaves at the end of 6 years. They work for 6 years. In the 7th year, they are freed. It's all kind of ties together. You can look at that. But the main thing I want to talk about was the cancellation of debts. So, thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Gene Getz is speaking today, so enjoy the service, and we will hopefully see you at Jason's Deli for lunch.
Yep. Okay.
All right. Thank you, guys.
We do